Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is the final webinar in our series on measurement. And today I'm excited to have on John Keene, the CEO of ServiceMinder with us. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Erin Martin, the VP of Marketing here at Netsertive. We have an action-packed 30 minutes of content, so I'm going to jump right in. Reminder, we'll send out the deck and the recording afterwards. We're also going to try to get to some questions at the end if we have time or throughout. So feel free to throw those in the chat and the QA window and we'll get through them. And so just a quick note about Netsertive and ServiceMinder. For Netsertive, we use technology to execute localized digital marketing at scale. So we have over 100 franchise and multi-location brand partners, and we absolutely love what we do. If you want to geek out on digital marketing at all, definitely hit us up. We're passionate about helping you scale and grow your systems marketing in the most efficient and smart way. And I want to pass it to John real quick to share a little bit more about ServiceMinder as well before we kick it off.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. I'm so glad that we made the top 3 so we can get you in the webinar series because right there on the bubble to be 3 or 4. So I'm glad we made it in. So ServiceMinder is we play in the home services space, and a lot of the topics we'll talk about are kind of generic and kind of independent of home services, but that's kind of the area of expertise that we play in. Our platform is built for home services. Obviously, it's franchise ready, so we support a little over 45 brands on our platform today. Integrating with everything is something we are big with. Obviously, integrating with Netsertive is something we do, and essentially, we're all about automating the home services production pipeline. And so what that essentially is for a home services company is, essentially you're doing marketing to make the phone ring, either the real phone or the virtual phone, by filling out a form, trying to schedule appointments to send guys to go create a proposal for the client, wait for them to call back again to try to convert and buy, then schedule the job and get paid. Right? So ServiceMinder uses technology to basically automate that entire pipeline and help you try to optimize it. And some of the stuff we'll talk about today is the marketing aspect of optimizing that. So yeah,
I love it. All right, well, to kick us off, just in general, I love to start with this question. In your experience, you've got a lot under your belt. Where do you see marketers fall down when it comes to digital measurement in general? Like, what are some of the biggest areas that they get wrong?
Yes, a lot of times it comes down to, are they measuring the right things, right? So you have a case where, are you measuring how many leads you captured? Are you just measuring impressions? Ultimately, you want to measure how much revenue you produced. And to be able to do that, you've got to tie that back to where the leads came from. And so there's a lot of ways to track those activities. And I think that's usually a big hurdle for especially new franchises that are just getting started with. It just seems insurmountable. Like maybe they do a really good job on the digital, but they then kind of fall down on tracking where referrals come, or tracking, the phone calls, or, other mediums that are not like go to a form, clicked on an ad, right? That's kind of the easy path, but there's still a much bigger part of the spectrum to track. And so you want to make sure that you capture, as much of that as possible, because what those leads do then determines, did that campaign make money or not?
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things I hear, which is kind of funny, is just like, is my advertising working or not in terms of truly understanding that ROI or ROAS? Because you usually have one piece of the equation, or not the full cost, which often happens. Like you'll see the revenue piece, in general, how much money you're making at the end of the day. But then when you get into the granular details, you're missing things. So.
And that definitely falls into the bucket of, sometimes the brand can't do everything, right? Like they may not know what the total ad spend, right? Because individual locations may be doing their own advertising as well. And the franchisees aren't reporting their ad spend data, or the tool that they use to run the business is not capturing that. Like you said, you're building an equation, but you don't have enough of the data to calculate the final number, right? It's really important to know how much you spent on those leads to find out what your marketing efficiency is.
Yeah, and another piece of that equation that I see people fall down in is the margin piece when you're trying to calculate, true ROI. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, of margin and why it's important, or how you think about that piece of it.
Yeah, it's there's different pieces of it in the pipeline, right? So you get n number of leads, right? But depending on where those leads came from, some might be easier to convert or close, right? So maybe Facebook produces a lot more leads, but those may be more tire kickers, right? So their conversion rate is a lot less. And so your effective cost per transaction is much higher because you're not able to convert as many of those leads. Whereas maybe direct mail, maybe your business is very photography image driven. And so direct mail presentation, those are very expensive to deliver, but you get it, maybe you get a higher conversion rate from those leads. And so calculating that efficiency, right, the kind of the ROI of what you spend, is not just how many leads did I get and how much did I spend on them, but how much effort did you have to put in to convert them into a customer. And then even further down the road, right, are some leads producing customers who are more price sensitive, right? So therefore you can't charge as much. So all of those things could have an effect into, did the campaign make money, to the bottom line or not?
Yeah. And so when it comes to tracking ROI, have you seen any best ways that marketers do that? Or, people that are doing it really well? Is it they're pulling all of the data into their, homegrown spreadsheet? Are they doing that in CRM? Like, what's the best way that you see the more sophisticated marketers being able to handle that well at scale?
I think everybody should do things manually in Google Sheets, right?
Yes, always.
Google Sheets, key in all the things, never spell things the same way, right? Just kind of randomly throw stuff in and make stuff you go. No, I think, the brands that are most sophisticated that do best with this, they create systems, right? And so then they create structure with those systems so that when leads come in, if they come from the same way, they're going to get coded the same way, right? So if they came from a digital campaign, by the time they get all the way to the CRM and the backend reporting, you have a high degree of confidence that those leads came from that source. If you don't have a system in place for tracking direct mail, right, you can do call tracking, you can do offer code tracking, right? There's a bunch of things you can do to bridge that digital gap to kind of incentivize the customer to tell you how they heard about you, right? And so if you're not doing any of those things, then, when the customer calls you, ultimately, not that they're evil, right? But they may lie, right? They may say, a friend told me, when in fact, because they don't want to admit that they fell for your postcard, right? So you want to create these systems in place to kind of circumvent that kind of human nature to just kind of not always disclose everything on the first phone call so that you can then get that captured. And then once you've got those leads coming in, track all the revenue, right? So that you can tie what they did back to where they came from. If you just have a big bucket of revenue, and you don't know where that came from, then again, you're missing one of those factors in the equation to calculate how efficient the campaign was.
Yeah. And I think part of that system does sometimes rely on the human piece, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're building the system, it's like, okay, like this we can automate, we can integrate this, but like at some point, maybe you have locations playing a part of that system that you're building. And I think that's one of the keys with, specifically digital advertising measurement is I think we had mentioned that cost piece. So I was curious, do you have any tips on best practices for keying in costs or like building that process when it comes to the manual pieces of inputting business results?
Yeah, we do a few things. So some brands, like they manage the entire marketing funnel at the brand level, right? And so they can essentially push the costs in for you. So if you're doing direct mail, you're doing it through the brand. If you're doing pay-per-click or SEO, you're doing it through the brand. And so, that's kind of one way to do it. For brands that are pushing things down more to the location level, make sure at a minimum that the mechanisms you're creating so that they have the ability to choose where did this lead come from, like make sure some of that stuff is locked down so it's just not free form text, right? So once you have kind of that structure, then you can start, maybe capturing some of that cost data so that you can say, hey, for this campaign, here's how much we spent in these months. Not to brag too much on what ServiceMinder has, but we have an ability to go in and key in kind of that cost data by channel, by campaign, and we recommend do that at the beginning of the year, fill it out for the year. That way you at least have a baseline to play with. And then if you time willing, right, you can go in and update with actual cost data. But also make a big part of that as a part of your annual meetings for your franchisees when you get together, right? You should have sessions that talks about the importance of this data because it's useful for the brand, but it's also useful for them. Kind of, you have to kind of, part of our franchise system is the education aspect, right? You want to teach the franchisees why this is important because it will help them spend money wiser and achieve their goals, which is usually to increase revenue. And they can come back with, how do I improve my marketing, as opposed to, I want more leads.
Yeah, yep. And one trend that I feel like I've been seeing a little bit more, and I'd be curious if you're seeing a similar trend, is more marketers taking that budget centrally and running the campaigns with either an opt-in or opt-out option, but like truly taking all of the marketing on, just to further help locations not have to worry about it, and still giving them flexibility and options of whether they want to be involved. So I'm curious if you're seeing that as well.
Yeah, definitely on kind of the, what people call the platform brands, right? Where you've kind of got a rolled up entity that has, 5, 6, 8, 10 different concepts. They're at a scale where it makes sense economically for them to aggregate things like direct mail and ad buying and online purchases, because they're spending a lot more money, therefore they can get a better deal, and so therefore they can kind of control how those results get disseminated and spent as well. So yeah, we're definitely seeing that as a trend. And I don't know if that's a side effect of their scale, or just they're bigger, therefore they're more sophisticated and have more experience doing that, just to kind of what is driving that. Because 15 years ago there were not a lot of platform brands out there, right? That's kind of a recent thing. So I'm not sure what the cause and effect is of that, but we're definitely seeing that, especially on the platform side, where people are again trying to squeeze every nickel they can out of what they're doing.
So yeah, looking at this measurement soup here, as you mentioned, tracking a lot of the digital attribution and measuring those things sometimes can be a lot easier when you're trying to integrate it and automate, all of the systems to be able to understand that piece. And so what would you say for other things that are a little bit more of that word of mouth, offline, like you had mentioned direct mail or like foot traffic? Do you have any tips or specific examples there of best practices that marketers need to be aware of to get those pieces to connect?
Yeah, if you're not in an environment where people are interacting with you digitally, so kind of retail, restaurant kind of things, I think this has been going on since before you and I were ever born, right? It's the whole idea of, coupons, offer codes, whatever. You want to create an incentive for the consumer to tell you how they heard about you, right? So it could be as simple as come into our store, mention this offer code, and you get a free widget, or you get 10% off your first purchase, or, join our shopping club. That's another thing I think we see a lot on the retail side, is creating, kind of membership, loyalty type things, right? You would think like, the Starbucks and everybody else who has the cards, that the whole point of that is, to make it easier for the consumer to buy stuff. And so, no, it's to make it easier for them to track what you're doing, right? So how often do you come into the store, right? If you're doing an anonymous transaction, you can't track that. So those are all tools that are available, kind of nothing's super new in rocket science, right? It's just kind of been around, but they all take effort to set up and roll out and implement. But that's ultimately what you have to try to do, is figure out how to convert that anonymous visitor into something that you can identify, maybe not down to a name and a phone number, but at least, some kind of unique tie back to the campaign, so that you can start to measure.
Yeah, which is where you've seen a little bit of the QR code coming back.
Exactly. Yeah. Because nobody wants to type in URLs anymore. No one knows what that is, right? It used to be, it's like, do I type the www or not? Is that still a thing? Or no, you just scan the QR code, so. Yeah, and that's actually a very good way as well, right? Because you can generate those QR codes uniquely, right? So even if you're in the store, you don't have to say, visit our website, right? You can have a poster that has a QR code, and that QR code encodes, hey, this is at store number 123. So when they scan that QR code and go to it, now you've got a little digital footprint to tie back to the fact that they scanned, sign number 1 in your store.
Yeah. And I think one of the key pieces with that, and specifically with like tying the local attribution piece, is that you have to deploy campaigns correctly to get the data back. I mean, when I say that, it sounds so obvious, but so often I don't see that happening. There's not the actual local campaign getting deployed correctly to measure it correctly.
Yeah, or make sure that your website, your brand's website, has the infrastructure to capture all that stuff as well, right? Nothing's worse than you deploy all these campaigns that have, UTM tags and everything else all turned on and going, and it goes to the website, and now you got to look through the logs in the website to find out what's working or not, right? Google probably wants you to look at their analytics stuff, but any mechanism that can automate the process of collecting that data from the website, like that has to be there first, and then also like test it, make sure it works.
Yeah.
Because go take a picture of the QR code and make sure it came through, and make sure your test transaction actually registers on your reporting system end to end. Don't just hope that it does.
Yeah, the true secret shopping of like going through the actual customer experience yourself can be kind of mind-blowing sometimes when you catch things, or, you know, like truly walk through it. You'll find a lot of things that you can improve.
All it takes is one character wrong in the URL that you encoded in your QR code, and now, you know, all those QR codes are worthless because people click on them, and then now they got a bad experience, right? Clicked it, got page not found. Now what? You know?
Yeah, and one of those specific forms to help automate, you know, lead tracking is call tracking. And we kind of mentioned this a little bit. So I wanted to dive into this one. And so how do you think about marketers and how they should be using call tracking with leads, and, you know, what you've seen go wrong and right, all that?
Yeah, definitely. If you've got a CRM system that you're using to track your leads and bringing your customers into, right, you want to make sure that that can handle kind of that lead attribution via call tracking. So think of it as, you know, if you've got yard signs, right, or direct mail postcards, or vans, or bags at your store, you could put a different number on the bags, right? Anything you hand out that the call to action is essentially, hey, give us a call, you want to have a unique number for each of those sources. And what happens is that goes to a system that says, hey, if you're calling this number, then I'm going to go let the system know that there's a call coming in. They'll send the call to the right phone number, so you don't have to have a bank of 10 phone numbers to answer phones for it. You only have one phone number, one phone to answer the calls. But when that call comes in through your system, you can also get a notification that says, hey, this is a call that's coming in. Maybe it's an existing customer, and I can bring their data up as well. But if it's a new customer, I can tell you, hey, they are calling from the yard sign campaign. And so as soon as you answer the phone, you know that they called from a yard sign or a van or a postcard that just dropped.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think another piece to call tracking that's also super helpful is being able to listen to some leads as well. And so like in this example, you can literally listen, okay, like, you know, location XYZ, like they haven't been performing as well. What's going on? Like you could go in, listen, like you can actually hear the questions that customers are asking, which I think is awesome to help with marketing materials, like training. And training. I mean, there's so many things you can do when you're listening.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about that on the digital tracking side, but that's like one of the reasons there is a funnel, is so that you can kind of identify where people drop off. You know, in the case of call tracking, if you have a recording capability, you can literally listen and find out why they dropped off, right? But on the digital side, you kind of have to use some forensics, right? If you lose 5% every step, but at this step you lose 20%, like why is that, right?
Yeah. Yep. That's awesome. So one call tracking question that just came in was, if you only have one phone number for call tracking, how do you know where the calling from, postcard, etc.?
So just the phone number, well, I guess there's a couple of ways, because some services can do what's called a whisper announce, right? So they call a tracking number, and then that number, you know, forwards the call to you, but before it rings through, it'll basically announce saying, hey, call from, you know, yard sign. So that then when you answer it, you have that information. So that's kind of, some systems offer that capability, but usually the most common way is you've got two systems working together, right? The call tracking system sends the call to your number. So all tracking numbers go to your one number, and then kind of out of band, right? They may send you an email, they may have a report, they may send like a web notification, like to an application like ours, where we can then use that and display it inside the browser. So when you're answering the phone and you have ServiceMinder up, we can tell you an incoming call from, right? And so you can kind of see that out of band as opposed to in the call. But yeah, definitely check around there. I mean, there's lots of different kind of call tracking solutions, but depending on, you know, what your system is, and even if you have a system or not, right, there's different ways to kind of solve that problem.
Yeah. And so you're saying that with call tracking, though, like a yard sign number is going to be unique and different than a direct mail.
Correct.
Like there's different numbers to be able to. Yeah. So I get, to kind of take a step back, you may go buy a batch of 10 unique numbers that are in your area code, right? And so then you're going to assign each of those 10 numbers to different campaigns. So the consumer will see one of those 10 numbers, and because they called that number,
you know what you assigned that number to, or the system that you set up with, you type in some stuff that tells it, right? So that when that call comes through and gets tracked, you can say that was a yard sign call.
Yeah, yep. And then the second question was, what would you recommend for a call tracking system? And I'm going to give a shameless plug here for some consolidation and say there's a lot of good ones out there, but I know being on the MarTech side of things, that's a simple one that most digital providers, whether it's like Netsertive or like a ServiceMinder, we integrate with call tracking and have it within our tools. So that's one that I would recommend not having another vendor in your MarTech stack when there's so many out there that this is like a key piece of the offering already.
And you want to use something that works with the platform you use, right? So
yes, that's already integrated. You don't have to mess with that or like add a headache step.
Yep. So if you've got a CRM that has call tracking capabilities built in, great. If not, then go see what call tracking systems they integrate with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing too is that, if you use a call center for answering your phone, like sometimes they can offer that as a service as well, right? So they can do the tracking of the calls, so they know internally, hey, this is a yard sign lead, so that then when they send the lead over to you by email or through a direct integration, right? So you don't have to mess with the phone numbers and the system, right? That's a service they provide. So look at what tools you're using, like Erin said, because odds are they will have some specific recommendations.
Yeah. Good tip.
Just do it.
Yeah, which also brings us, that's like a great softball for our next section, which is integrating all of the marketing operations and systems to be able to do this easily. This is actually one that I am so passionate about, because I just personally think that literally the failure or success of marketers comes down to operational excellence. I think there's just so many things where like you can have the best idea, but whether you can execute it or not, and all of these different, operational things really means the difference between stuck in the weeds with tedious manual, non-strategic work, or like being able to elevate yourself out of these manual processes to getting to that next level of marketing maturity. So John, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what your take is on those kind of critical functions to try and automate, and from a systems perspective, like how do we get ourselves out of like manual tedious weeds to be able to work on more strategic items?
So what you're saying is don't use Google Sheets.
Yes, maybe. I may or may not have a few of them myself though. So
exactly. Not to go too far down into touting ServiceMinder, but that's kind of a big part of our philosophy as well. You talk about geeking out about digital marketing, right? We kind of geek out about, business process automation and tracking. So, in our platform, we try to basically track everything all the way end to end, and it's all native within ServiceMinder. Well, you don't have to go glue 9 different tools together to make that work. You can kind of set up, the vast majority of it all inside ServiceMinder, right? So you can set up your advertising inside Netsertive, and then that can send leads over to ServiceMinder. All the digital information comes over automatically, right? There's no spreadsheets, there's no downloads, and so the data then just kind of calculates and presents automatically. And I think that's the experience you want to think about for your franchisees as well. One common thing we see, especially on the emerging franchisor side, is, they've kind of optimized the process. They're ready to start rolling out to franchising, but they're not thinking about that that process works great for their starter location and maybe their first 2 or 3 franchisees, but you need to really think about what happens when you have 50 franchisees or when you have 100 franchisees. So all these things that look easy now, like you said, turn into huge, people sinks to go manually turn a bunch of cranks to get things to work end to end. So, kind of think about what the franchisee experience is and how many tools do they have to go in to deliver, the brand's service. You want to consolidate as much of that as possible into a flow that's eliminates the chance for human error, is scalable and trainable and easy for franchisees to learn and do, as opposed to, again, 19 steps to go. Because odds are, as you know, if a franchisee's got 19 steps to do something, they're going to do 3 of them. All 19.
I mean, it's just kind of like how we want to market to consumers. When they find us online or they do something, you want to minimize the clicks that it takes for them to get to a purchase. You need to minimize the amount of work that it takes the location to do something. So where do you see the biggest piece of like manual work being done? And then how do you see marketers who are doing it well kind of tackle that and systematize it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of kind of that spreadsheet soup you were talking about, right? So, people who know what to do but don't have the tools to do it, They'll go download the call reporting from the call tracking software. They'll go download all the leads from the locations and they'll match them up by phone numbers. They'll go download all the leads and look at the direct mail list and match up based on addresses, right? So kind of doing all of these processes to kind of connect the data up. Maybe they're looking at month-end reports, and pulling in data from that as well, trying to tie some of that back to the addresses, to the direct mail and the call logs and all that stuff. So I think, the opportunity there is to, create and build a system that kind of does a lot of those things automatically. And once you do that, then you can start freeing up the ability to do more sophisticated things, such as kind of going back to what you're marketing and optimizing for, which is, are you trying to optimize for leads? Or are you trying to optimize for revenue? Well, if you want to optimize for revenue, then the advertising system needs to know how much money you're making, right? So that they can tailor the advertising to match not just how many leads were produced, but matches how much revenue was produced. So the sophisticated ones are really creating that full end-to-end feedback loop, all completely automated.
Mm-hmm. And I think the one piece that I would put a plug for the manual, like, yes, you should dig in and do the manual piece of this, is a little bit of that pipeline analysis. Like you want it, like to your point of like, where's the conversion dropping off? You want to be able to identify when you have a leaky bucket. And so when you can look at the data and figure out like something's not right here, like that's where you want to be spending your time to be able to then adjust it, because you don't want to be paying for, the phone to ring and, all these different things if there's no follow-up, for example. That's a big thing that happens.
Yeah, or if they just don't answer the phone, right? If they get 10 calls and 9 of them go to voicemail, that's a bad experience for the consumer, and that just creates friction for the consumer to give you money. And I think the more you automate, that then frees up your time to do like what you said, right? Now that we're automating and we're capturing these metrics at these key points, and now they're consistent, right, across my location as well as all the other locations, now we know what to look for, right? Oh, this is because they don't answer the phone. This is because, maybe when they get somebody on the phone, maybe the sales staff isn't crisp in Q&A. Let's go listen to some call recordings. Or we get to the proposal stage or whatever, and then the dropped off there. Well, maybe the pricing is too high for this market, or what, right? There's 1,000 answers for why things may drop off. But if you spend all of your time to produce the results, you don't have any time to go look at them to make, kind of those strategic analytical decisions based on the data you've captured.
Yeah, which kind of reminds me of, I had a podcast guest on a while ago, and she was saying how she did that similar type of analysis, and she found very typical that, a lot of the locations were not following up on the leads. And so she was like, I come from a B2B world, and she developed a sales development rep arm to fully take the follow-up of local leads in-house for the marketing team, because then she could follow up within, 4 minutes. She controlled it. She could actually like have them, do most of the work and then pass it off. But then there was no like leaky bucket, because she kind of centralized it, which I thought was kind of a cool idea. Yeah,
we see some brands that kind of, if a brand has a centralized call center kind of approach, whether it's outsourced or in-house, right? They're doing that to kind of solve that problem, right? Essentially, they want to send booked jobs to the franchisees.
Yeah.
And then have a trained staff who knows how to, handle objections and deal with the phone calls and kind of all of that stuff. There's certainly some, if a lot of your business comes in through the phone call as opposed to digital, in other words, if it's got to go through a human, right, to get to the revenue, then the better you can make sure that works well end to end with people who know how to do it.
And a consistent approach.
Yeah.
All right, well, we got a few minutes left. So I did want to get real quick to share a few examples of ways to close that attribution loop with and without integrations. Sounds like, John, you and I are both huge fans of integrating and automating literally everything that you can to ensure that a human isn't the one doing it.
Automate all the things.
All the things. Yes, we want time and, our lives back. So I don't know, real quick, I've got one example of how to do that without integrations, but I don't know, John, if there's any final thoughts that you want to, leave people with in terms of what's, best practices to ensure that all your systems are talking to each other via CRM integrations or any of that.
Yeah. I think definitely, we talked about this earlier, is that you want to have a system to make the data consistent, right? So, if you have a place, let's say everybody's trained very well and they type in, the customer, how did you hear about us? And they type that in. If that's basically a free-form text field, you will never be able to do any analytics with that. It's got to be drop downs, it's got to be locked down, it's got to be consistent. Otherwise, you won't have any of the structure, right, to draw the conclusions.
Yeah, yep, that's good. And the one example of a non-integration example I wanted to show you that's possible is another way to gather some attribution from digital advertising. If you don't want to do a full CRM integration, on the right is Netsertive's Attribution Pro solution, where you can actually drop a lightweight script on your website or landing page. And then what it'll do, it'll gather the information of where the lead comes from and attach it to a hidden form field on that page. And then so that way, that will go to, you know, a ServiceMinder or any CRM, where then within there you can see the lead source data. So this is another way to be able to do it.
Yeah, another nice light way to do that is if the back end can understand UTM tags, right? So if your form can basically take the UTM tags that came in on the URL and then pass those through on the form, now the back end can process the UTM tags, so you don't have to do any kind of maintenance on the website side. Just whatever UTM tag comes in, it passes all those through, and then the back end kind of automate all of that.
Yeah, love it. Yes, lots of cool functionality to be able to close the measurement gap, which is marketers we love, and we're becoming technologists. We are marketing technologists basically at this point. I didn't see any other questions come in, and we're at time. So I just wanted to thank you guys again for joining us. John, it was so awesome to have you on. And thanks for everyone who joined live. I'm excited to see you at IFA next week and the rest of the crew.
Same here. Same to you. And is that a unique QR code just for this webinar?
It's not. It's my LinkedIn to connect, but touche, it should be. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. Take care. Bye.